Jonathan mentioned, this is kind of the diagnosis for the physical building itself and the systems within it. It doesn't dig into the operational side and how well it supports your workflow, but kind of just the initial diagnosis on the.
Hear my own voice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just it's listening.
Oh, brother. So just a quick outline for the facility condition presentation, which is just this arrow. Okay. So we'll go through just the high-level executive summary of the facility condition assessment. We'll talk about what facility condition index is, the rating, and how it's pertinent to this project. We'll talk about the expected 10-year lifespan, the maintenance plan. We'll talk about the criticality breakdown of the facilities, kind of a high 30,000 foot level facility condition assessment overview of each of the facilities we saw, and then conclusions and next steps, which will obviously lead back to Wold. So, all right, so we looked at 6 facilities totaling about a little under 30,000 square feet of space. I thought this map was very helpful, going down 61 there. You've got the water treatment plant, you've got the North Shop, the old fire station, the South Shop, the M House storage, and Hangar E storage. So these are very important locations for public works. These all have pieces of equipment and personnel working at a lot of these facilities or traveling back and forth. So I thought that was really important to show. Obviously, I didn't do a full assessment on the hangar. We looked at it, but it's not owned necessarily by the city, for example, but we did look at it and, at least archive the conditions and the size. So I identified about $4.6 million in deferred maintenance over the next 10 years for those facilities. And I do want to point out 3.5 of that 4.6 is needed pretty urgently within the next 12 months, I would say. So the FCA is a do nothing plan. So this is, we're not going to move forward with Wold's plan. We're going to stay in the facilities that we have. This is a unique situation. I don't typically have facility condition assessments that recommend not investing in the current facilities. Personally, from the study, it's showing that you're going to spend good money over bad to repair and get the buildings up to a current standard. And that does not address efficiency needs, space needs, the like. So I just wanted to throw that out there right away. So the first facility, the North Shop, is in critical condition, and we'll get into what that means on the next slide. And then the old fire station is right behind that in poor condition. So jumping into what those ratings mean in terms of, poor, critical, et cetera, the Facility Condition Index was developed by IFMA, so the International Facility Managers Association. It is basically a health check on your facilities. So it takes that deferred maintenance need that we identified against a building replacement cost. So it's like a like for like, same square footage, modern day replacement costs, like for like. So that gives you that percentage on that rainbow. So you can see where the North Shop lands. It's actually off of the critical rainbow there. It doesn't even register, it's so high. A large majority of that 4.6 is needed in that North Shop in terms of dollars, just to get it to a somewhat livable space to function out of. The old fire shop is in poor condition. It's in that 40% range and kind of high on the poor side. Obviously, the South Shop, it's really a pole barn. There's nothing really to that facility, so the rating is pretty low. There's not mechanical. There's a little bit of electrical for lighting, but it's a dirt floor. And then the water treatment plant, it's virtually barely 4 years old, and Public Works only occupies a very small percentage of that facility. So I'm going to just pause for a second. I know that's a lot to throw at everybody. Does anyone have any questions so far? 10-year annual maintenance plan, this is, I mean, you can see the majority falls right in 2025. So right now is where the attention is needed pretty immediately. So getting into kind of the 30,000 foot level, so the North Shop, you can see kind of the pie chart there of all of the needs. And, you know, site work, exterior enclosure, roofs, all of those items are a huge driver in that, you know, 3.3 million that is needed for the building. The exterior enclosure is very, very important right now. You can kind of see that bar, this is a bar chart in terms of condition across the facility. There's about 2.1 million in poor condition out of that 3.3. So you've got a lot of items on the facility, in the facility, that are in very poor condition.
Can you go back one slide? Are you going to get into the detail of those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So site work, oops. So the site work, the parking lot's in definite need of a mill and overlay. It's definitely seen better days. So you need to do that. And a couple years later, I would definitely recommend a seal coat with a stripe, restripe, just to, you know, keep it, you know, the longevity of the parking lot. The biggest part, the exterior enclosure. We did have a structural engineer look at this building just to make sure it was structurally sound. They did come back and say there aren't concerns at the moment with the structure of the building. However, over time, this is going to only continue to deteriorate. You know, the expansion and contraction with freeze and thaw, you know, there's definitely foundation questionable issues around the building. You know, the CMU is starting to chip away, and there's block that's cracking around the entire facility. So in our facility condition assessment pricing, there is repair to the entire exterior along with a repaint of the building. Getting into kind of the laundry list, high level, the roofs need to be replaced. Interior, there's not much for interior because it's really just the bays. So more repairs to the floors is that interior construction part, because there's really little office space in the facility, which obviously will touch more on that space needs. But refinishing the bay floors is definitely of importance, along with the graded floor drains. Those are definitely a safety hazard. It's a trip hazard currently, you know, with metal sticking up and not level. So recommendations, if you're going to stay in this facility, a fuel island, you need an interior wash bay. Right now, they are washing trucks outside of the facility, and in the wintertime, it's just glare ice outside of the bay. And a large majority of the work being done on the equipment, your assets, are being done outside because there's just not adequate space. But again, I won't step on your toes. I highly recommend fire protection and suppression being added to this facility if you do stay here. Again, that goes back to the safety of your employees as well as the assets within the facility. You've got, you know, big salt trucks and things of that nature that are expensive. So, you know, protecting the people and your assets, if you stay here, I would recommend that. We talked about the floor drains, and then obviously your HVAC. It's pretty much all at the end or close to the end of its useful life. And there's no CO/NO sensors. So when the doors are closed and if you have exhaust running in there, there is a safety issue with that as well. Electrical panels, a lot of them are original to the building, which is 1956, 70, 60. We definitely need to replace those. That could be a potential fire hazard. And LED lighting upgrades interior-wise as well as exterior. Just from a safety standpoint on the exterior, having improved lighting would be really preferred. Getting into the old fire shop, again, we're sitting about 1.3 million. for deferred maintenance there as well. You can see again that exterior enclosure. There is some issues with the exterior, nothing like the North Shop, obviously, but the roof, electrical, there is some interior there more so than in the North Shop. I did notice some evidence of some potential asbestos containing materials in that shop. So something to look out for testing wise. And then fire protection, again, I highly recommend if you're going to continue to have people working in the facility and having assets living in that facility to have fire protection to protect everyone. Again, you can see this one, the old fire shop, there's more of that median condition, which is, it's kind of in the middle of its lifespan. The red, obviously, there's quite a bit in the poor category as well. So you can see those two numbers there. Just some high-level photos. You know, again, there's asphalt needs there. The security fencing around the entire site is not in good condition. It is actually leaning, so it's not really securing the site very well. And then you can see some of the block degradation on that corner of the building, so that needs to be repaired as well. Again, talking about the CMU repairs there, you can kind of see along the base there, probably a lot of salt damage from, you know, being lovely in Minnesota. We gotta have that. So tuck pointing, repainting, we gotta reroute the water away from the building. That's really important on both the North Shop and this old fire station building. Roof replacement as well. The interior, like I mentioned, there's definitely some potential asbestos containing materials in it, and outdated, you know, break rooms and the bathrooms are not ADA compliant. And then the fire protection, like I said, it's a small enough facility that you're not necessarily required by code to have it, but again, protecting the assets of the city as well as its personnel, it's highly recommended to add it. Again, HVAC, it is at its end of useful life. Again, those CO, NO sensors are very important to have for safety for the people inside the building and improved air quality. Electrical, the generator. So the generator currently just supports the fire station right now, and it has a manual transfer switch. So when it needs to turn on, someone has to physically turn it on. That's obviously a problem when it's an emergency. Someone, you know, there's automatic transfer switches nowadays that'll automatically flip transfer to, you know, backup power. Both facilities I would recommend to be on backup power when if you replace that generator and you stay in these facilities, because obviously Dave's crew is really important to the functionality and, you know, navigation of, you know, the entire city. So them being able to function during an emergency with power outages is very important. Electrical panels, again, they're outdated, and then LED upgrades within the facility are also recommended. These are just high-level photos, just showing, you know, the South Shop, that pole barn, just to give you an idea of the extra storage space that they have down that Highway 61 there. I just put some dollars in there just for minor repairs. There's really not much to do there. And then the water treatment plant. It's a brand new facility. There's money in there over time to just, you know, seal coat that parking lot and just some updates to some of the HVAC, you know, as it comes up in the next 10 years. So you'll start hitting that 20-year mark there. Hangar E and M Health Storage. These are just, again, storage spaces where Dave's team keeps pertinent pieces of equipment in both these facilities. All right, so we are recommending to divest in these two facilities, North Shop and Old Fire Station. We, as KA, have done over 500 facility condition assessments, and we've only seen a handful where we've had to recommend divestment. This is not a typical thing that we do. So it's pretty critical, the condition that both of these facilities are in. Any questions?
Dave, you live there, you have anything to add?
Pretty much summed it up.
Okay,
All right.
sure. Start out, switch up the staff.
So that was just the physical condition. Now we'll dive into a little bit on the operational assessment of the buildings, how well these are supporting current operations or hindering current operations. As Dave mentioned, we did do a number of interviews with this team. We walked through the buildings. We got a good grasp on, how essentially the deficiencies and how the building might be holding back efficiency and day-to-day workflow for his staff. So I'll kind of run through those and then we'll dive a little bit into what we're recommending for needs in a new facility or modifications to a facility and how that would translate into planning for the future. So Marley kind of touched on this already, but just the spread of facilities throughout the city is really a point of emphasis for efficiency on day-to-day operations for the team. Going to multiple different facilities, gathering all the equipment they need for the day and then returning them at the end of the day. It's a lot of time that the staff are having to do this. As Mari mentioned, it is split between water treatment plant, the kind of main hub at the north shop, and then some of the ancillary storage spaces. I will say these are probably more of the primary assigned spaces. Dave has said there's maybe a few locations kind of spread where things are stored more informally. So there's just a lot of inefficiencies with this setup. Diving more into the actual buildings, these are specifically related to the north shop and the old fire hall. But across both, there's really no kind of formal office area. So that includes offices, training and conference rooms, and then also staff support amenities. So like a formal locker space, designated lunch rooms, break rooms, and then the technology to kind of support that modern work environment. A keynote to point out is, so the photo at the top is their locker facilities. It's kind of in a shared mechanical room, and there's no separate gender respective locker facilities, no changing rooms associated with that. So supporting women coming on staff can be a true challenge now and into the future. There's also just a general lack of storage space across all facilities for the equipment and vehicles. We'd really recommend right sizing all of that, which you'll see in our space program here shortly. But they're trying to cram a lot into the space that they do have, and so that's where we start to hit some of those safety concerns and hazards with essentially trying to make workable space around the equipment.
I'll just add too, as we go on to the next one, that part of our analysis is we'll get an actual inventory list from Dave, so we know every single vehicle that exists, we know what's inside, we actually know what's being planned for future purchases as well. So we can kind of plan around not just what the existing space is and kind of, put our finger in the air, we're actually taking square footage from every piece of equipment that was documented.
Yeah, so these are some of the, at the north shop, just some of the condition of the shop towards the beginning of the day or end of day once everything's back in its place. And there's a big seasonal rotation too, right, with public work. So you might see more plow trucks obviously in the winter time, to kind of what's priority at the moment to get out onto the roads. Some other things we talked about with them were the lack of a dedicated mechanics space and repair bays. Right now that kind of occurs in the main storage area, and there's a lot of amenities that we typically see in ground lifts or kind of supporting equipment and machinery, hose reels, ear drops, that sort of thing that's currently lacking. And also just co-locating this with other storage areas or making spaces too multifunctional is where we kind of get into that safety concern for the mechanics especially too. And then on the right side, there are some photos of what they've kind of makeshifted into parts rooms or kind of informal workshop spaces, obviously shared with some of the vehicle storage areas, so it'd be nice to kind of separate these out a little bit more into their dedicated work areas. Kind of along that same line, we've got a sign fabrication and assembly space that's actually stored. It's nearby, it's in the warming house next to the north shop, so ideally that would come onto site and have its own space in the primary work area. And Mari kind of touched on these amenities that we typically see at public works facilities that we just don't have right now. So those would be a wash bay. Obviously, right now they're doing it as best they can outside. A dedicated fuel island would also be beneficial. Right now they're using gas cards at local gas stations, but it'd be nice to kind of bring that in-house. And it also would be an opportunity to provide fuel for public safety as well for those fleet vehicles. And then there's no dedicated brine mixing and storage space. We typically like to keep that isolated in its own zone with the salt exposure or the brine exposure to the building structure. So ideally that would be its own confined space. And then kind of just holistically looking at the site, just looking to also get more storage for the salt sheds, just to get a better supply of that year round, or for the winter especially.
One of the things we looked at is just the staff numbers and, separate from like City Hall or something where staff numbers really drive square footage. A public works facility can accommodate a lot of different numbers of staff because it's really just depends on what vehicles assigned to that individual person. But when we're looking at those projections, it's just another data point for us to check and see where there might be increases in staff and whether or not the facility could potentially support that. So this is just sort of I would say a little bit of a side study just to see what those numbers would be at if we looked at kind of what some of the requests are now and how you might support the growth of the city that has been sort of, I think, indicated based on your own comp plan, but then the Met Council and things like that as well. So we talked about the deficiencies, and then the next one is sort of talking about the actual needs themselves. So again, having some formal areas for staff space, having an actual office, a lobby, the break room. You can pack a lot of people into multi-use areas, but eventually it just becomes cumbersome. And again, not having support for women's staff is, I think, unfortunate. And then just a mechanic suite space that really allows for them to kind of maintain the vehicles and have something sort of sit while you're waiting for parts, and then you can be working on another project. The general sort of rule is that you have 2 or 3 bays per mechanic. And right now you're not there, but the reason is that you want to try to keep vehicles moving. And if you've got something that's sitting waiting for a part, you might have other vehicles stacking up that have simpler work that needs to be done, but you can't move it. So having that sort of transition space and all the support areas around that are pretty critical. And then just vehicle support spaces. So some of the other things that you do, not just store vehicles, but sign shop, wood shop, and then some of the brine mixing and things like that that Jordan talked about. Those are all things that we looked at specifically for what those needs would be. And then you kind of take another step back and looking at what's warm storage and what's cold storage. So like I said, we had that full inventory list, and we really worked with Dave to understand, okay, we know that we're not going to try to put and propose everything is inside warm storage. It's nice to have that, but there's a reality behind what do you need that's critical when you show up in the morning that you can't kind of start when it's 10 below out or whatever, and what can sit outside and be ready for those seasonal changeovers. So we kind of filtered through that and know that there's some needs there as well. And then the site just having additional salt storage and some covered materials and storage bins, so the stuff just doesn't get affected by the weather as much, and having space to kind of move around those different areas as well is important. And right now, as we look at sort of some of the space needs, we do assume that treatment plant will continue to be used for some of the overflow and utilities operations as well. So we'll jump into sort of the square footage needs here next, but understand that we kind of subtracted out that space knowing that was potentially usable still, even if we said what's the ideal program numbers. So jump into that, unless we want to stop there for any discussion on the needs. So we kind of talk about just space standards, and really this is just so that we're not just coming up with numbers on the fly, or Dave saying he wants an 800 square foot office and we just plug that number in, right? I mean, we look at industry standard and we look at what's realistic for these types of spaces. This is more just based on office spaces. For the vehicles, we're really looking at how much square footage does a truck need to be able to swing the doors out and back out and all of those different things. So that's more scientific, I would say, with the space needs on that part of it. So these are just the standards that we kind of agree upon, so we know we're all working with the same deck of cards. So then when we look at the actual space program, there's really, I'll go into kind of just explaining what these are first, and then we can look at the numbers. So the existing is obviously just what your current square footage is. Corrected as if you just took what you have that's deficient and expanded it, made it right, and then proposed as sort of what would have to change if you continue to grow. So that's, you start purchasing vehicles and you increase your fleet. There's the accommodation for that. And then you look out to 2044, and that would have another set of increases in terms of a little bit of staff support space, as you may have seen from those projections, but a lot of it has to do with just vehicles and adding to the, you know, overall assets the city needs to service the whole community. So right now we're about 29,000 square feet. If we sort of corrected all those spaces and we looked at not just areas that are inadequate, but areas that don't exist, so spaces that just don't exist today, that's what that corrected square footage is. So it jumps up to, you know, approximately 82,000 square feet. Just for context, we kind of looked at some other similar sized cities, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end here, but that's really not that far off, the 82,000 square feet. We would say, you know, there's a range from 75 to 120, 150,000 square feet based on your community size, but it also depends on, you know, how much gravel you have or what other services might Public Works provide. So it's not easy to do sort of an apples to apples comparison. But when we have this 82,000 square foot number, it looks like a huge change, but to us, it looks like pretty much adequate for a size city that you have with the department that you're working with. When you look at the proposed square footage, so there's about a 10,000 square foot increase. And again, like I said, it really is on that one vehicle storage line. So we kind of broke it down by category so we could kind of expose where is it that the critical growth is needed. And then there's about another 10,000, a little less than that, increase out to 2044. So really, between just correcting what you have and trying to accommodate for growth and sort of projections, there's about a 20,000 square foot increase over the course of that 20 years. Again, primarily on that warm storage piece of it, because the staff spaces really don't change a whole lot. And we didn't hear that you necessarily are gonna add a whole other mechanic. And so that's where that kind of number boils down to. And then we looked at that site program and kind of just tried to evaluate what else would be needed. So the salt storage space there, just some staff parking and other covered material storage. That doesn't necessarily play into the overall building square footage that we're talking about, but it's just items that we have to accommodate when you start planning a whole site and have not just a building sitting there, but all those other support pieces as well. Questions about the sort of methodology that we use here? There's a much more specific sort of program that has this broken down space by space, but it's a big document and it wasn't probably worth absorbing more of your time today to try to do that, but it's available if needed. Questions on that? Okay. So I think, you know, at this point, we're starting to kind of rally around some options. Obviously looking at the potential site just south of here. And we also looked at sort of the existing and what would happen there. And so we're kind of starting to try to develop that and understand the costs that would be associated with that. Working in concert with Crouse Anderson, and they're just sort of, you know, I guess the collective experience between Wold and KA in terms of public projects. We've got a lot of information to tell us what the actual costs would be. But it also helps us with these different options too, when we're looking at site planning and things like that. I think for this group, we're interested in potentially looking at some other facilities. So you can kind of compare a little bit and understand, what is it that we're lacking? And it's not like let's keep up with the Joneses thing. It's more about, here's what we have now, and what does like a modern facility look like, and what does that gap really look like? Because I think it would be important to understand that. We're giving you the sort of the numbers right now, but kind of seeing it in person, I think might help put some more context around why is there such a big increase that's being proposed as well. So we had some potential dates. Dave, I think, was kind of working through whether or not that would work for folks or not. But we kind of thought we would go look at Hugo, Ramsey, and then there's a few other optional ones to look at as well.
Are these based upon like the size and matching like what our community
Pretty
would
similar,
need?
yeah.
Or just what's available?
No, we actually chose ones that were pretty similar. Yeah.
It's closer to that 82,000 or the 102,000?
I have to go back and look where we're at, but we can provide that information for sure. I think we've got that.
Out of these facilities here, what, like, year, how, I know Hugo's relatively new, like, how far out or how long he's been up? Do you know?
Oh, in terms of time?
Well, no, like, how long's Hugo? That's been, what, year and a half? or 2
Yeah,
years?
yeah.
So, like,
Ramsey's not that far off from that either. That one's a little bit newer.
So is the idea to decide like, okay, we reinvest in the current facilities or make a decision now, or not now, but sooner than later, to all new facilities down in the land that we have south of town? That probably needs to be considered sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, we would say yes. I think, obviously Dave and his team have lived with what they've had for a long time, and so there's always some flexibility, but our concern with the critical nature of the building and just the inefficiencies in his staff, as the city continues to grow and need more services, it's gonna be more and more difficult to try to function out of that. So yes, it's good to not forget about this conversation today, but we understand that, there's probably some big dollar amounts associated with this, and so it'll take time to just understand what that looks like and what the right approach is.
Any initial thoughts, council, on direction?
Well, a couple, of course, there's opportunity costs of doing nothing. So in the scope of your work, do you have, any way to quantify what that inefficiency, that opportunity cost is by, if, doing nothing, maybe, critical repairs,
Yeah,
leaving the inefficiencies embedded, what does that cost?
yeah. And Dave and I talked about that a little bit in our very first meeting, is actually looking at, it's a little tricky to do, but it's not impossible, looking at all the time that a staff person might take to drive from one building to the next, or literally Jordan and I would sit and watch them work in the building and see how long it takes to walk around every single piece of equipment and get back. And so there's that staff time piece of it. But then also looking at, okay, how often did a piece of equipment had to be replaced because it wasn't in a protected storage situation, or because it had a lot more miles on it than it should have because it's going up and down all the time. So it's not something that was part of the study necessarily when we responded to the RFP, but it's something that we can probably dig into a little bit more as we start to look at what those options are.
I guess that the opportunity cost of the efficiencies is mostly staff time. I mean, by far, that's the most expensive.
For sure.
Is the other question is that we've got a placeholder in our 10-year plan for this project. Cost of construction per square foot, does that align with what's good in the 10-year plan, or are we over?
No, I don't recall the exact number that's in there. I thought we were fairly close, but a lot of it just comes down to decisions about what is the construction type of the building, how much do you actually build, So some of the assumptions that were built into that previous plan, I don't know what all of those were, but I think it'll help to kind of compare that when we dig into those options and cross them out a little bit.
With this type of plan, knowing that there's a, potential need for an additional 20,000 square feet, 20 years, to build it to 82 now with planned expansions is kind of baked into it or upwards?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen communities do it both ways. So a lot of public works facilities will have like a knockdown panel on one side where you increase warm storage, right? Just that's the biggest need. So you just add another, bay essentially to it. But other communities will look at that and say, okay, well, more space isn't necessarily a bad thing. More money is always harder to come by. And if you wait another 15 to 20 years to build it, it's just gonna cost that much more. And so those are decisions that unfortunately the five of you have to wrestle with. But we can certainly kind of look at that as an opportunity for phasing that in a little bit.
Both are options.
Yes. Thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts. Being relatively new on the council, my first thought is, do we have enough land that the city has already in their possession to build a facility of that size? Would be my first question. The second question I have is, have we already done studies or gotten appraisals or evaluations on the 3 properties that I'm guessing we would be abandoning, as to what we could do with those properties in terms of a sale or other use for that property? I'm guessing the best option is to make sure we have one facility that has everything in it. We can't move the water treatment plant. And then the question is it the north end of town, the south end of town, or in the middle of town? Or where that location would be the first things that are running through my head. Personally, I see no reason to work with these buildings. If we can afford to relocate and build a new building, that's what we should do. Those are a disaster.
You're sticking a Band-Aid on something.
That's just my initial.
Yeah, you didn't get the privilege in summer of '23, we walked through, we had a tour of that, and it was quite eye-opening.
A privilege, as you say.
Yeah, the condition that
I could see.
they were working in, so I guess that would be is we lean to we got the land, and that question, Dave, is do we have the land out there to accommodate what they're talking, fuel, all the storage?
Yeah, Wold has, maybe with help from Trail Centers, have kind of taken that square footage and put it on that chunk of property, taking into account for the airport fly zone too, where we can't build in, and it fits in that piece of land.
With expansion.
Yeah, and, we're vetting the option out a little bit more with Dave, but wanted to try to focus the meeting on just kind of getting the information here, but we can, very quickly kind of come back to this group and look at what those options are. I think we're pretty close to being able to convey that as well as the potential costs. Council Miller, to answer your question, there's actually 2 RFPs, if anybody remembers. There was the original one when Pat was here to look at redevelopment of some of those properties. And it kind of made sense to not go forward with that more extensive study because it was really more about, let's focus on just what the needs are for public works first and just get our arms around that. But I think you could easily do some just appraisals and look at what the county has for property values on those and make some decisions based on that kind of information without going too far overboard. But yeah, there's space at that site based on our current analysis to accommodate what you need.
Just real quick, when we past council sessions about this, we've talked about that, where the fire hall's at, is either redeveloping that as a park or even maybe selling it.
Add the tower part, because you have the rest there, but, so that's one option, or selling it and having it redeveloped.
And I guess my further question is for the council is, because you guys are much more in the know on this, is this money obviously has to come from somewhere. Is there any type of grants and funding available for a project like this for the city?
That's why we brought Mark in.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at the right person.
Write the check.
Yeah, grants, Probably not, we'll just be upfront, but, certainly the legislature will be examining some of these things. Again, we, recently got the public safety money. I think you may see some of that come back. And so it's not necessarily that there might even be money for this project, but maybe there's some that can offset something else in our CIP and then shift money around based on that. I saw a lot of cities do that with the public safety money. They didn't necessarily fulfill a wish on their public safety side as much as they put the money into public safety and then shifted some of that money out of public safety into some other category. So that might be something to look at too.
Another thing too, Kevin, just to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we have, with our water and sewer fund, because of how some of that, we have dollars there. Do not, I don't know, recall what that is.
The enterprise fund would pay for probably half of that facility just because it would be combined. Right now, you're kind of stored in separate spots, but they would contribute to that fund, so it wouldn't be all general levy dollars, it would be some from fee-based.
And the sale of some of those other properties potentially could help fund that as well.
And the site specific too has had a huge amount of infrastructure just recently installed that was really going to be city responsibility, but the county wanted to come and do something with that hazardous waste center well before we wanted to go there, so they've extended water and sewer to that site, and then the intersection improvements at Headwaters Parkway, that's roadway coming in, that's going to be stubbed right to the property too, so I mean, right then and there's a few $1 million worth of work that's just been done part of that site already, so.
I go back to the bonding the grant, I know, it was Christina that said that they don't score very well for bonding and grants and that, but on the flip side, if you were to do a redevelopment for a park at that site, that would score well just because of the location, and if you had those kind of amenities there, then that would be an option where you can offset if you were gonna do a park, then you could possibly, apply for dollars for that. But I think what you're saying that buildings like that don't score very well, or they don't tend to really give out money for public buildings.
So what next steps, look at our calendars to see if those, or do a poll or something to see what dates might work that second week of March potentially?
Yeah, and if there's other facilities that you want to look at too, we're more than open to do that. And when we plan it out, then we'll have some sort of cheat sheets that people can kind of look at the information too. We usually put them like two or put together, so.
Are these facilities all ones that your firm's designed and Kraus Anderson's done, or?
Various inclusion between our teams, but Hugo and Ramsey were not our projects. We just thought it would be good because they're similar size, so.
Anything else on this?
Just for my, again, silly brain, are you guys consultants and just kind of do this as a consulting basis? Or are you, and obviously potentially want to be contractors, it sounds like, but obviously as a city, we would be getting bids and looking at other options as well, if we go down this path, or is this kind of where we're locked in?
Yeah, what is the RFP on this? What's the scope of work?
Yeah, I can explain. So the RFP was just specifically to study this option. So Kraus Anderson's basically a sub of ours, although they're their own sort of construction management firm as well. So we were hired with just a fixed fee just to do the studies portion of it. At the conclusion of that, the city could choose to just go straight into, design, at which point there would also be a decision to whether or not you would want to have a construction management firm be a part of that, or, whatever your approach might be to bidding. Yes, after a while, that design would be completed where you'd be able to bid that out. But up until that point, the city can kind of do what they want to in terms of professional services. So, oftentimes when you go through the study, you can just tell the same firm to continue on with design. There's always an opportunity to go back out for RFP, which, we do that, we have to, but, you're pretty nimble right now until you get to the point where you kind of pick an option and say, let's move forward, then you kind of that's your next kind of decision point.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, there's a number of different ways to bid a facility like this, not quite like the street construction you're all used to, where you design something and then bid it out. There's a number of different ways that the statutes allow a building like this to be managed. We could talk through some of those options as we get down the line, but it's a little different than your normal construction project. So you can have kind of that construction manager type relationship, or you can do more of a classic design, bid, build scenario. So there's a number of different ways to do it.
Anything else? Well, thank you for coming up tonight. Appreciate the insight. Looking forward to continue working with you and look at some facilities.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, council. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, second agenda item is ATV golf carts. I don't know if Joel's gonna start or if this is Captain Hanegraaff or who's gonna take that, but
We'll start us off here in just a moment. Let's see if I can get my computer back. Pull it off the map here. Just there. Thanks for getting cold.
It was. It's actually cold. It's not July, my friend.
Mayor and members of council, back in July, Chief Peterson brought forward the discussion again to look at an ATV, UTV golf cart ordinance in the city. Given some staffing challenges that we went through between July and now, we were a little bit behind in getting that back to council for review. So tonight before you in the packet is our first draft of an attempt at this ordinance. I want to kind of preface this by saying I would really encourage council to take a very close look at this. I think we need to really fine tune it a lot, bring it back for further discussion after we've gotten some input from council tonight on where we want to see this go and what direction we'd like to see it move in. Bring it back to another workshop just to kind of clean it up, fine tune it, make sure that we're moving in the direction that council would like to move in before we bring it to a meeting for final approval. So the ordinance that was in the packet this evening is kind of a compilation of various ordinances that are already in place in other Minnesota cities, not any that are necessarily similarly situated to Forest Lake, but cities that have already implemented similar ordinances. Chisago City has done quite a bit of work on this, and they actually just revised their UTV ordinance this last December, so we've used some of their language. The city of Victoria, I found, has a very good ordinance in place, and so we kind of pulled from that. And then of course we've used the League of Minnesota Cities model ordinance as kind of a guide. Let me just look up here. Chief Peterson is on vacation this week, but he kind of updated Captain Hanegraaff here on where we're going and asked Captain Hanegraaff and Chief Nguyen to be here tonight to discuss any public safety considerations as we're moving forward with this. I'd like council to kind of let us know if we are moving in the right direction with the timeframes that we've laid out in the ordinance. Sun up to sunset is kind of where we're focused right now, which seemed to be in line with the direction that council gave back in July. Some cities have provisions to expand that a little bit to allow from travel from a destination back to an abode. For example, folks who are out on the lake ice fishing at midnight and they want to take their ATV or their UTV to travel back home, that would be allowed in some cities. If we go with just the sun up to sunset provision, that wouldn't really be allowed, so we kind of would need to fine tune that with council guidance. The way we have it kind of written out right now is just one big lumped together ordinance. There is an option to break out the golf cart portion of this from the ATV and the UTV ordinance, and we would just create another section within that chapter of our code to provide for that. So if that's something that council would really like to do, we can certainly do that. That's the way the city of Victoria has theirs formatted, and like I said, I really think they did a nice job with theirs. And then again, I'd like council to kind of give us direction on the registration period. The proposed registration period is contemplating 3 years. Some cities do 1 year, some cities do 2 years, some cities do 3 years. So it's really up to council what we want to do here. I would say that 3 years is less of a burden on staff for this, for registration purposes. But at the same time, 3 years can be a long chunk of time, and we might need to make some changes to the ordinance as we're moving forward here, and that might become an issue as well. Chief Newman pointed out that in the ordinance, we have proposed at this time, if there is a revocation for any violation of the ordinance, it would be a 6-month revocation. I think Chief Peterson chatted earlier with me and said he thinks that perhaps a 1-year revocation period would be more appropriate. Again, something for council to discuss tonight and give us further direction so that we can fine tune this so that it works for the residents here. So with that, I will turn it over to council and to Chief Newman and Captain Hanegraaff for any discussion or direction.
Okay, so I think it's right, we start with some of these 4 topics that brought up, starting with the time sunset to sunrise or sunset. I thought I had read somewhere in there that maybe is that not, if you have a light, taillights and that, then that's a late, you can expand that, or?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of written like that. Really, that speaks more to, when we're getting towards, kind of like when you're on a boat on a lake. When you're approaching that dusk time when the sun is beginning to set, you have to have your boat lights on. It's the same thing with an ATV or a golf cart. But that may be, quite frankly, I've looked at this for so long and it all began to look the same. But if nighttime use is allowed, obviously we want to have very specific provisions to require that there's a tail light and headlights and adequate reflectors so that folks are safe.
I don't remember this in there, but do they not have to have lights, headlight and tail light 24/7 like a motorcycle?
They do as far as UTVs, ATVs. I think the biggest question with the lighting is gonna be the golf carts. And I think that's why we have to be very specific and break golf carts out and have their own real specific set, because the statute is very clearly defined in snowmobiles, UTVs, ATVs, what the definitions are of them. And there's certain portions where golf carts aren't applicable to all these other rules that are already in place. So I think the more specific we can get to the golf carts, that's where the lighting's gonna be an issue. And I know some of the new ones, they have everything on them anyway, so they're probably already installed. It's the people that buy that, $200 refurbished one that they're gonna have to start strapping lights on and show us, okay, yes, I do have lights that are adequate, so you don't get rear-ended or are actually seen throughout the night.
Yeah, I would agree to break out the golf cart from ATV, UTV.
Yeah, and they don't have the speed of ATV or UTV either to be on the road for that reason too. I think is important.
So that would answer question 2 then, we'll separate that out, which is good.
That's a big one, I mean, yeah.
We're all, you know,
Yep.
agreement on that, so we'll separate those 2.
And I think you could keep the golf carts in that dusk, in its own entity, because the UTVs, the snowmobiles, it's already legal to drive those throughout the night as long as you have those lightings, and that's a pre-factory installed item. And that will make it less convoluted, because there's so many aspects of this specific ordinance that could be. It's kind of like us when we get phone calls on, I want to duck hunt on the lake. Where can I duck hunt? Well, we're looking through this, and the interpretation gets to the point where it's hard for us to read through it and understand it. And the more specific we can get these things broken down, I think it's going to be a lot easier for everybody to understand it.
So then back on the timing, you know, if there's ability to have lights, or I'd like to see it a little later, you know, it's 4:30 in December, it gets dark, and so a lot of times people are just getting off of work and heading out to do maybe some ice fishing or something. I just think it makes, unless you both have some major concern over that piece of it.
I don't think it really, I've yet to see a golf cart on the ice going through the snow. I think we just have to be very specific on the golf carts. If we're gonna issue them a permit, the lights can't be a duct taped, you know, a plug-in halogen light to the front, and then I have a flashing bicycle light to the back. We just have to be specific that it's easily seen for 500 feet. It's, whether or not it's a manufactured light or it's some kind of installed light. I think that's where we really just need to keep the focus for goal-specific ones.
Okay, so you're saying just the sunset, that's just on golf carts specific, the UTV stuff?
I would leave the UTV stuff out of the time frames, because they already have, I mean, in realistic, a brand new UTV has just the same amount of equipment as a vehicle does. The snowmobiles, the rules are already in place for snowmobiles and state statute, same with UTVs. I think it would just be specific to the golf carts when you come to time frame.
Do UTVs have to have plates
They
to go on the roads?
have regular ATV registrations.
They do.
Yep.
They have to be displayed on your,
Not necessarily to drive them on the lake, or do they have to have them if they're out in the winter time on the lake, or is it just on roads?
They just-
anytime out off your property, is
Yep.
my
Off your
understanding.
property, okay.
So this would, I mean, there would be 2 requirements here. Folks would have to have their ATV, UTV, or golf cart registered or licensed through the state, whatever the correct terminology is. In addition to that, this ordinance then requires that once they've done that, if they want to operate on city streets, they would have to register here as well. So it would be kind of a 2-step.
So with that, and I'm not opposed to it, against that, but why is that? I mean, if you have a license through the state for a vehicle, why do you need a separate license? You don't need separate license for each city. Why would we? Is it a safety thing, or make sure these machines check all the boxes for the requirements to be on city streets?
They're providing proof of adequate insurance. They're going to be operating on city streets. That's going to be one of the requirements. They have to show that they have adequate insurance. We don't want to give the thumbs up to folks operating these on city streets if they're not going to be properly insured, because they could be a danger to other drivers or other folks who are on the streets.
So to get a license from the state, you do not have to show insurance currently?
I didn't have to.
You do not? Okay.
The other thing is there's no inspection. I can license or register my ATV with the state, nobody looks at it. And so one of the things with them coming in and get the registration through the city, we can verify they have adequate lighting, that your machine's safe to operate, meets the intent of what we're trying to do here with the city. So it requires them to come in and get a visual inspection. And through the state, that doesn't happen.
Okay. So let's say with Chisago City having a license, if Chisago has a license, or you can do it there, I mean, people passing town from town, they'd have to get a license in every city they want to operate. Does that
Technically,
make sense? I mean, that's.
technically,
Okay.
yeah.
Um,
And I guess that would be up to the police, how they would be enforcing that. Would that be a warning situation? I know when we were here in July discussing this, it was interesting, most of the folks who were in the audience were from the city of Wyoming or Chisago County. I think we have, maybe Jeff Klein was the only one here as a Forest Lake resident who spoke on behalf of, from a resident perspective. Everyone else was from outside of the city, so.
And that's allowed though, right? We're allowing outside residents to get these licenses, or are these just residents only?
That would be a question for council, just to
Well,
decide.
Can I ask, does Wyoming have this sort of ordinance?
No, Wyoming does not. The county of Chisago has an ATV ordinance in place which applies to county roads, but the city of Wyoming does not. I actually called and talked to their city administrator to ask him about that.
So I was just thinking, if the neighboring communities did, could there be a reciprocity?
Yeah.
We know that they're being inspected and have the right equipment, it would be nice to be able to have that reciprocity.
Yeah, I think that's actually, yeah.
When we did this initial research, we contacted cities that required licensing. What we found out is, in a given year, very few licenses. These come in front of council, it's a big deal, there's a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
I think you're gonna impact a lot of people, and people are gonna be rushing in, and what we found out is 20 licenses, 30 licenses, all they're giving in a given year, so it ends up kind of being a big deal about nothing.
Right.
Is that because, sorry,
No, go ahead.
is that because people just aren't coming in? Or is it because, and so I'm guessing there's an enforcement issue. You can't catch everybody.
Yep.
Or is it, you think that's the only people that, there's
Well,
only
we
20 or
asked-
30 that want them?
We asked that same question, because we thought there'd be a lot more than that. And the response that we got is it's not an enforcement issue, so.
Interesting.
So I do like that if we were able to reach out to other communities. The one that comes from is Chisago City, because we border it, and if Wyoming was to do something to have that restaurant, that'd be a great idea. And I think personally, we should allow non-residents to be able to apply for this, but maybe that avoids that issue, because the idea of this, part of the idea is just economic, impact of these people come from other cities, so allowing non-residents, I think, makes sense.
How would we make people aware that Forest Lake has that? Would it be posted like signs around the lakes or on the roads, or how do you make people aware of that? I mean, if I'm coming from here and I'm driving over to Chisago or
Put it on the city
I would
website.
I would never check that. I would just go download my four-wheeler and go out on the lake or my UTV and go out on the lake, and I might drive over to local establishments.
You know, if they post a sign at the main launch or not, or at the DNR thing saying, permitting required for ATV or UTV use.
If you're coming into town and going to Lake Settleboro Park, offload your speed, run out on the ice, and you pull the pizza pub and have a cocktail and run over to Tim's Marina, maybe fill up with gas or whatever, and you come back on the lake, you're gonna drive on some streets. You're not gonna do this.
Right, no, I understand, but if I wanted to veer off, for example, drive down to the log cabin, knowing where it is, or coming
Well, that
up
would
the
be
road.
problematic, because that would be traveling on a state highway, which isn't allowed.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what's interesting about this. I mean, this is a fair, it doesn't just open it up for folks to be driving all over the city on their ATVs or their golf carts, because you can't drive on county roads, you can't drive on state roads. So that right away just, Broadway is out, 11th is out, 97 and 61, those are out. And those are our main thoroughfares through the city. So this is really more going to be focused on kind of our neighborhoods, really. And I think, I asked Captain Hanegraaff if he could pull some numbers about how many calls they've received about ATV complaints in the city. And I think didn't you say that, it's more just kind of neighborhood kids ripping around, that's the calls that they're getting, so.
We had 11 last year, and vast majority of them were kids on private property that wasn't their own, or it was somebody driving a UTV, 65 miles an hour down 97, or something that's obviously illegal no matter what ordinance we have. So it really wasn't what this kind of ordinance design is for. Most of the complaints we had, they didn't even weren't applicable.
And are there age limits? I don't own one, so I don't know. Are there age limits to drive a UTV, like a
those are-
snowmobile or a jet ski or anything like that?
Yeah, those are statutory.
So when you see kids that are not that age driving them around, whether it's in the yard or not, they're not supposed to be doing that?
Correct.
Interesting.
Now, if it's being operated on private property, that's a little bit different. Because, they do make those mini ones for kids, and that's the purpose of them. But this ordinance proposal doesn't touch on any of that. We're not getting into what folks are doing on private property. This is just related to city street use.
To me, the idea of reciprocity, it's probably not germane because, like you said, it's been mostly for local residents that want to go to their local watering hole, or we couldn't drive here. So,
No, I mean, that's true.
I'd have to cross several roads just to stay on city roads if I want to drive to my office. So it's like,
So what's the point then, right?
right, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
All right, so registration, I think, any thoughts on that time period, whether it's 3 years, seems to make sense. And revocation, Chief's recommending here.
That's what Chief Newman is suggesting.
You are, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think 6 months is not a deterrent for anybody if they're abusing that. In the first year of this, or the first couple of years, there's gonna be an educational thing unless somebody's doing something really bad. Just kind of inform them what the rules are and don't do it again. But I think that if you get that person that's continually breaking the rule, or has just gotten to that degree, I think 6 months just isn't enough.
Yeah, I agree.
Speed, what thoughts on that? I didn't read deep, but is it for UTVs, is it speed limit, local street speed limits, correct?
So a lot of other cities do kind of break it down for class 1 ATVs and golf carts, so they can't exceed 20 miles an hour on city streets. And then the class 2 and bigger UTVs, speed limit, they have to obey the speed limit. Yeah.
On the lake, on the frozen lake.
I thought it was unlimited speed on the lake.
It is.
Until they crash.
I know, right? They hit that ice chunk that popped up a little.
What other, so we've time, separate registration, revocation, what other direction or?
So we can hopefully work with Bolton and Mink to kind of prepare a map that's a little more detailed than what we were able to pull together for the council packet, which I tried to pull it up on the screen and it's gone dead. But is there any desire for council? I mean, do we want to start by opening this up to all city streets? Is there a desire by council to limit it in kind of a trial run with certain areas or neighborhoods? I guess I like a little bit of direction on that so that we can bring it back a cleaner map with maybe some highlighted areas where council would allow for this kind of use. Again, it's limited to city streets. Those are public city streets. We can't give the green light for private city streets for this usage. So that limits it a little bit too. We don't have a ton of private city streets or private streets in the city here, but there's a handful at least, right, Dave?
What was that?
How many private streets do we have in the city or private neighborhoods? Roads? A handful, 2 handfuls?
It's 2 pocketed areas, Bridle Pass and Kiwi.
Yeah.
I guess knowing that, the demand hasn't been terribly great in other cities, I'd say just open it up to all city streets.
Okay. The one provision I did put in the ordinance is that council can revise the map at any time through resolution, which I think makes it a little cleaner and more efficient instead of bringing back a whole ordinance revision that we then have to go through the approval process and the publication process. So when we'll fine tune this a little bit more, we'll bring it back for discussion and make sure that everything is kind of in line with what council wants. And then we'll bring forward a map as well for council to review, just so that everyone is clear on where it's being allowed. Once we get the green light to bring it forward for full approval, we'll bring forward the ordinance, but then also a separate resolution that will kind of finalize and firm up those streets where it's allowed, which basically will just be everywhere. Give a little bit of, let everyone kind of have free reign, but then we have to reel it in. On North Shore, we might have to reel it
Actually, that was nice and smooth.
in. Yeah.
Well, I think it has to be made, a point made that this is a privilege, so if this becomes
That's
an
exactly
issue,
what it is.
then we take it back, it just goes away. So people have to be on their best behavior, because we can't have a bunch of issues, having more time and effort from the police department monitoring people. So I think that will publicly, because we did early on, at least I remember getting some feedback about people concerned about just the safety issues, the noise, and all the rest. There is going to be, as this becomes more public, a little bit more pushback. But if we're clear that if this becomes an issue, it just goes away just as quick as we got it started.
Is there any clubs or anything like that in town like UTV or ATV clubs in town?
There's a couple, but I think just
Are
social.
you part of that group by chance? No?
Social
I want to know the name of our club.
Social media, there are clubs throughout the state, so, if we can get that out, let people know, I think we want to, let people know that it's allowed here, that's kind of the idea, again, look for that economic part of it. That's a good way to educate. Maybe there is some signage, in certain areas.
I have seen other cities, more up north, where you see a lot of ATV usage, because there's tons of trails and tons of clubs. They will post little signs about ATV ordinances in place on their city, their
City limits.
Yeah, actually, now it's like if you're in Wisconsin, there'll be a road, and it'll say ATV or UTV trail or whatever, that's part of the road. I don't know if we have to get to that extreme, but maybe it's.
Counties have a lot of different rules further north to go to,
Yeah.
more flexible.
Yeah.
So what about this? Were you gonna post your certificate? I noticed that some of them had that in the window area or whatever type of thing. Do you have a specific spot that you wanna have them required to post their permit or whatever, so it's easily seen by law enforcement or whoever to enforce this? Is there a specific location?
I think I'd be interested in staff doing some research to see if we can find a sticker option that can be adhered to the plates that ATVs and golf carts are already going to have, where they're displaying their state registration information. I don't know. That's something that
Not a lot
I've
of
looked
room on that plate,
No, there isn't.
what they already have.
Yeah.
Require.
Yeah, so back window, is that typically or front?
Front window, so it can be seen readily. I know that's where a lot of them are posting on that.
Yeah.
Articles that you provided us.
Yeah.
So whether it was upper center or lower center or left side or whatever.
We can look into some sticker options. I think that would probably be easiest.
Mark, any thoughts other than you guys are crazy or something to?
No, I was reading through the statute, myself here. I think Chief Newman brought up the idea that it can be a controversial issue and everyone gets their hair up on the back of their neck, but it's been my experience too. Centerville has this, and granted, a town of 4,000 people, but I think we had 3 licenses. So there's a handful of people in town that like to use them. I mean, it's becoming more and more a thing, right? Because UTVs are not what they were 20 years ago. They're dang near a car, most of them at this point. So I think it's a fair thing to think about. I don't have an issue with it.
And I think like everyone here knows, it's already happening. I mean, just the other day I saw a 6-person UTV driving down from the shore. I mean, I see it almost every day now. It's pretty common.
They're plowing snow with them, so they're commuting to other locations to plow snow for other
Yeah.
people and
Yeah,
stuff,
they're
so
doing that too.
they're out and about, at least this time of the season.
Yep.
So what, as far as the time frame, you think, how quick,
I think, we'll work on just fine tuning this a little bit, doing some revision, breaking out the golf cart portion. I'd like for Chief Peterson to get back here in state from sunny Florida so he can work on this too. So I think probably we could bring it, and I also want to send it to legal for their thorough analysis so Amanda can get eyes on it. She took a quick look at it already. Probably that first meeting in March, we could have it as a discussion item. I think that would be doable, and then if we're good to go, we can get the map put together. I think we could have it ready for council approval at that second meeting in March. If there's not a whole lot that needs to be done.
how do you envision the inspection piece of it? Who on staff is gonna inspect these things?
We don't know yet. Yeah, I think that's something we're gonna have to talk about. Some cities have their police department that handles all of this. Some cities have their city clerk handle it. So I can tell you your city clerk doesn't have the capacity right now. So I think that's a discussion we'll have to have internally here, at one of our department head meetings and see what we can come up with.
Luke, would that sound like a CSO? Would that be a position, something that they, once we get those in place?
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of goes line in line with our child safety seat. We can run a quick training and train in a wide variety. Majority of it's just gonna come with the golf carts. And I mean, the UTVs are already gonna be set up factory for it. It's just gonna be the golf carts, really. It shouldn't be too much work. Okay.
We'll send them up to the flower shop and let you take a look. And sign off on it. You're an inspector, the golf cart inspector. That's right.
Anything else? I appreciate that timeline. Although there is not many attendance tonight, there's just been a lot of that gets asked all the time. And so I appreciate that aggressive timeline. If we can't quite get to that, that's understandable, but if we can be close to that, that'd be great.
I think it's doable. I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So baby steps, and I think we'll be there, before spring.
Just a note on the statute, operation prohibited on airports. So we don't even need to go down that road, it's just plain old prohibited.
That's state statute,
Yeah.
right? So you know that.
I'm messing around with that. Just happened to on that one.
Yeah. Do you anticipate a workshop, obviously, for the 17th of March? Happens to be St. Patrick's Day, so.
You want to go out and celebrate?
We actually do have a couple items that are already pending for that agenda.
Okay, that's fine.
Let me just pull it up real quick so we can just chat about them real briefly. I can't remember off the top of my head what they are. I think they're predominantly law enforcement focused.
Patrolling.
Yeah. So, Chief Peterson and Captain Hanegraaff, we're going to talk about the flock safety cameras at that meeting. I know they're anxious to get council up to speed on how they see those being a benefit to the community and to our officers. And then Detective Olstad and Amanda were going to come and dig deep into that crypto coin world. So I think those are two items that we kind of want to keep moving forward. If we won't have a quorum, though, we won't have a meeting or a workshop. We'll have to revise that and bump them. So if everyone's going to be in St. Paul, the green face paint on, let me know ahead of time so we can get ahead of that.
I can promise the flock presentation won't be very long. Pretty self-explanatory.
Anything else?
So this is for the calendars, is that the April workshop on the 21st?
I believe it is.
And did you make email today about July?
I did, I was just gonna bring that up. So, sounds like the chamber has just released their golf tournament date, and it's consistent with our July workshop, or our July 2nd meeting on the 28th. So, we could do it one of two ways. We can kind of wait and see how that agenda is looking as we get closer to that date, and if it's a very light agenda, the mayor can always determine that we're just gonna cancel that meeting and we can move those few items to the next agenda. Or we can reschedule that meeting and hold the Monday meeting on the following Tuesday like we did last year. So I guess council, if you want to give direction on how we kind of want to monitor that, do we want to wait and see what the agenda is looking like as we get closer and then make that call?
Yeah.
I've got it on my calendar though to keep an eye on that as we're approaching.
But
Yeah. Right, anything else from anyone?
Just got one,
Yes.
one for you, Mayor. In case any of you are asked if you see them out, I did, or was awarded a grant for 2 robots. So we do have these 2 new robots in our facility. They're gonna be put out into service here pretty quick. So if anybody asks you about these robots, they were about $12,000 for the 2 of them, but that was all grant funded. But what it does is it allows us to take our body cameras and communicate through the robot. So we can put the robot into Walmart and we can stand outside and we can go through Walmart if there's mental health issues or anything like that. We can communicate with somebody without getting close. But there should be, they're gonna be a big asset to us for a lot of things. They have really good range. Like I said, we have the ability to both record our conversations and communicate with them. So.
it's like the,
They are about, they're 12 pounds and they're about, they fit in a Pelican box about like this, but wanted something durable that'll last, so the manufacturer basically told us throw them through a window or throw them up in plates downstairs and they'll last. They'll rewrite themselves, so. If you see remote control robots running around or ask about them, that's what those are.
What kind of training, I mean, is everyone gonna be trained on those or just certain officers or how?
So it's really easy for this group to grasp it because that was easiest. It's a Nintendo controller, is basically what it is. It's only got 2-3 buttons on it and that's it, but, the battery lives are great. They don't have very much maintenance, and if it is, we can do it in-house.
Unless somebody picks it up and hauls it out and throws it in their car and takes off on the road.
Yep, we can GPS them.
Right, with no other business, I'll just, call meeting adjourned.
yeah, absolutely. Wait till you get those cameras up through.
I should ask, with that crowd and that